Spider-Man has been a part of my life for essentially my entire life. He was my gateway into regularly reading superhero comic books, and he's my favorite superhero. Well, the Scarlet Spider is, but they share the same, spot, if you understand what I'm saying. You get what I'm saying? Do you get what I'm saying? Like, I like both. However, there are various key moments in my life that contributed to why I love Spider-Man so much today. So, on today's video, I'm going to be taking you on a journey through my early memories with Spider-Man.
Stars and Stripes!
Hello and welcome to another Carrot Scraps video, and by another, I mean the 93rd. And a happy Valentine's Day to you if you're choosing to celebrate it today. Now, Valentine's Day is a holiday that is typically celebrated between two romantic partners, but I don't think it's the only way that you can celebrate it. I hope I'm not alone in thinking that it's totally acceptable for two friends to celebrate Valentine's together in a completely platonic way. Now, since my move, I haven't really been able to meet any new friends recently, but that's okay because that's given me a lot of time to return to something that I absolutely adore. Since I settled in my new place, I started reading Spider-Man comics again, and I've rediscovered how much I loved the character. Now, it's not like I ever stopped loving the character. I think I just took a natural break like all people do. I think it's totally normal for people to naturally and even subconsciously take breaks from things that you love without even noticing it. And I think that's what happened to me with Spider-Man. Maybe a certain Avengers game took most of the attention, So I've returned to Spider-Man comics since the move, and it's been a really cool trip down memory lane. I mean, I'm catching up with modern comics and I'm reading back issues, and in both scenarios, I'm reminded of why I love the character so much. And being exposed to that passion is something that I haven't had in a while. So this Valentine's Day, I thought it would be cool to make a video about something that I really love and something that's really close to me. Spider-Man. Because, no hyperbole, I absolutely love this character and this franchise and this mythology. Spider-Man is insanely important to me and a huge part of my personal DNA. So let's get into it and talk about where my Spider-Man fascination began, the comic books. So I feel like I've mentioned this before, and if not, I'll definitely mention it multiple times in the future. And the reason being is that this is a very important part of my personal history. That's what a lot of these early memories videos are, honestly. Anyway, in the attic of my family house growing up, there was a stack of comics that I would check out regularly. A number of them were Marvel comics, and some of those Marvel comics were Spider-Man comics. For years, I would just flip through these comics, and because I couldn't read and I wouldn't be able to read for a long time, this was my only exposure to these characters. Just being amazed by the covers and flipping through the pages was enough for me. Because I looked at these covers so frequently, a lot of these covers stayed in my head to this day. And so, as a result, many years down the road, when I went looking for Spider-Man comics to buy and read, I would recall the characters on these Spider-Man comics that I saw on these covers growing up. And that recollection would dictate the direction that I would start reading in. A lot of the early comics in the stack featured the Scarlet Spider very heavily, who would eventually become my favorite superhero when I started reading comics. Now keep in mind, another reason why this is significant is because being exposed to the Clone Saga this young is part of the reason why I'm so obsessed with clones as an adult. And this actually gives me a good opportunity to bring this up. If you're anti-clone, then I'm anti-you. If you're anti-clone, then essentially you're anti-carrot, and carrot is anti-you. So, just whenever your earliest convenience, press pause on the YouTube video and exit your house. Thank you very much. All right, the next joke. And I actually have one of those Clone Saga comic books whose cover will never leave my brain right here. I will never forget Ben Reilly being consumed by bees, which is why I wanted to frame it and, honor that memory forever. And there were even a couple of Maximum Carnage comics in there. It's so wild to me that I didn't really know what a superhero was back then, and that looking at these covers were some of my first exposure to these characters. Characters that would eventually define my entire life. Superheroes and Marvel comics are such an important part of who I am, and it's just so weird thinking back to a time when colorful characters on pages I couldn't read were first being introduced to me. So obviously, comic books were a huge part of why I love Spider-Man, but at the time I couldn't read them, so I was forced to just look at the covers and the panels inside the pages. But my next exposure to Spider-Man allowed me to engage with the character more deeply than I had before. So let's talk about Spider-Man the Animated Series. Now, this is a brief but significant part of my history with Spider-Man. I absolutely loved the 90s Spider-Man cartoon and the Spider-Man Unlimited cartoon growing up. Both of these shows were two of my favorites, and again, a lot of my love for Spider-Man comes from these versions of the character. And that's basically all you need to know. I watched these shows a lot growing up. But I did have a funny note that I wanted to mention really quickly. As a kid, I remember thinking that while I loved Spider-Man the Animated Series, I thought it was like way older than it actually was. Like, I didn't think of Spider-Man the Animated Series as a new cartoon, even though it was only a couple years old when I started watching it. Like, in my head, using my kid brain, I thought this cartoon was like 20 years old. I think the reason for this confusion is because I was also a fan of the Batman Animated Series as well. And even though both cartoons essentially came out at the same time, one definitely looked better and still looks better than the other. I mean, I really do love the way that Spider-Man the Animated Series looks, but come on, the Batman Animated Series is absolutely gorgeous. So when I would watch Batman, I felt like I was watching a new cartoon, but when I was watching Spider-Man, I would just think to myself, man, I wonder how long ago this came out, not realizing that it came out around the same time. Anyway, that's a non sequitur, but I always thought that was a funny observation for a kid to make. Now, with comics and animation out of the way, it's time to talk about a part of Spider-Man that I didn't expect to keep me into the character for so long: toys. Growing up, I faced a lot of difficulties in school because of my reading comprehension skills. It took years to figure out how to help me, and it wasn't until my dyslexia diagnosis that I was able to get the help that I needed to finally start learning in a way that was productive for me specifically. Anyway, it was a really stressful time, and I was really stressed out as a kid because of it. But I'll always remember getting this Spider-Man toy cutting through all that stress. You see, after the diagnosis, I started going to these additional classes to help me learn how to read. And it was difficult for a kid my age to understand why they were going to additional classes if they weren't in trouble. Now, I remember all this so vividly because of this toy that I received. After the first day of one of my additional classes, when I went to go see my family, I received a toy. And this toy was a Spider-Man action figure from my dad that meant the world to me. After so long of being mocked by kids and even teachers, it was really difficult to go into a new setting and to understand that these extra classes were to better myself. I actually still have this action figure. If you haven't been able to guess, it's right next to me. And I absolutely love this thing, and I'm so happy that I've kept it all these years. This is the same one that I had growing up, and yeah, the articulation is still just as awkward. What's happening down here? Why did they allow this to happen? This should not be how Spider-Man moves around. Why? Why, toy makers? Why did you let this happen? And I'll just put you right here. He's magnificent, isn't he? So looking back, I like to remember how happy I was when I got this toy, and how a lot of my stress was lifted off my shoulders, even if for a moment. Because in the end, the aid that I got from those classes clearly helped in some way, because I read like crazy as an adult. In fact, I read more than a lot of other people without reading disabilities. So with comics and animation out of the way, it's time... Are you kidding me? I gotta turn this... Give me 1 second, it's work again. Hello?
Hello, Carrot Boy. This is Rudra calling once again on behalf of Juniper Technologies.
Oh, hey, I got the box that you sent, and I've been starving it like you asked, but I didn't think I was supposed to work today. Is everything all right?
You are correct. At this moment, you are not required to work. I am just calling to check on the progress of the blood samples we requested from you.
Oh, yes, that's right. I took the samples just like the instructions said. I just haven't had the time to ship it out just yet. I'm sorry about that.
Our superiors will be pleased to hear this update on the blood collection project. So, what are you up to? Writing another superhero story?
Oh, no, I'm making a YouTube video, and I'm just going over some of my, like, early memories with Spider-Man. He's one of my favorite superheroes, and I thought that would be, kind of cool to do on Valentine's Day.
Oh, nice. That's pretty solid. I like the Batman.
Oh, yeah, Batman is, he's pretty cool. Hey, you mentioned that your name was Rudra, right? Why don't you and I become friends?
Friends?
Yeah, I mean, sure, we're both coworkers, and I haven't been able to make any, new friends since I moved, and we both like superheroes, so I don't know, I was thinking, why not?
I like this idea. I also like the Batman.
Yeah, I mean, Batman's pretty cool. Yeah, like I said, yeah.
Okay, Carrot Boy, let's be friends.
Nice, man. That's awesome. You're one of my first friends out here. Nice. Hey, Rudra, while I have you, can you tell me why corporate needs my blood?
I am not allowed to tell you that.
Yeah, okay, yeah, I figured that's what you would say. Now, while we're still in the toy section, there's actually one other significant Spider-Man toy that I received back in the day. This one I got from my Nana on Thanksgiving. Now, before I continue with this story, there's one distinction that I have to make before I get into it. Growing up, I had a Nana and an Abuela. Both of these names mean grandmother, as I'm sure you're aware, but they're two separate people, just so you're clear. I don't want anybody to get confused by that. So on this particular Thanksgiving, my Abuela came all the way from Puerto Rico to visit me and my family. Now, this was huge because we didn't get to see each other very often because of the distance between us. And my Nana decided to visit as well, which meant that both of my grandparents were in the same place at the same time, which rarely happened to me growing up. Now, for whatever reason, my Nana gave me a Spider-Man action figure when she came over to visit. I didn't know back then, and I still don't know to this day why she gave me this present, but I was blown away and super excited to just have a present. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I noticed that the previous Spider-Man action figure that I had was limited in its articulation. Action figures and how well they could articulate was something that I was super aware of as a kid. Well, this Spider-Man action figure that my Nana got me was the Cadillac of Spider-Man action figures. I still don't know what that means or what a Cadillac is, but you know what I mean. You get what I'm saying. He could move every single part of his body. He could even move his fingers. It was incredible. But even though I opened the box extremely carefully, when I removed Spider-Man from the plastic, his arm immediately fell off. Now keep in mind, his arm didn't break. It fell off. Plus ratio. No, never mind. No, yeah, so it didn't break, it fell off. Now, I admit, this was devastating. But I didn't let a broken toy spoil my fun. So I grabbed some medical tape, I taped up his wound, and now I had a battle-damaged Spider-Man. I loved the idea that this version of Spider-Man had seen some really grisly stuff in his time. It was really cool to me that you could see the history on him because of his wound, and then he continued to fight anyway. Now, I had this action figure for a while. I played with him for years. So long that he had his own continuity. He had an ongoing story that continued to chronicle in my head even when I didn't have the toy with me. Now, eventually, I got really big into anime and I started watching Naruto, and Naruto became like my favorite thing for a while. And I thought that Naruto and the characters in that show were so cool that I wanted my version of Spider-Man to do the same things. And so it became an important part of my one-armed Spider-Man saga, that he learned how to perform powerful ninjutsu like from Naruto. His specialty ninjutsu, of course, was webjutsu. And I would just think about how this dude would use webjutsus to fight ninjas. It's so funny to me that something as ridiculous as combining Spider-Man and Naruto was pursued so sincerely by myself as a child. I felt no shame about this concept at all. I mean, imagine taking another superhero and mixing it with another prominent anime. An anime that had nothing to do with that superhero's mythology at all. Something like, combining Batman with the world of One Piece. You know, billionaire Batboy wants to stop local crime, but he also wants to be like king of the pirates. You know what? Like, I was trying to like joke around and be funny, but like thinking about it now, the world of comics is so ridiculous that that's honestly not that out of left field. And in fact, we talked about Carol Danvers being a pirate in a previous video. So looks like young Carrot was pretty good at writing, even as a kid, I guess. Looks like I was a genius comic book writer as a child. That give me an Eisner. I'm ready. I'm ready for my comic book writing award. It's a little late. I wrote this story young, but I'll accept that whenever you're ready to send it in the mail. Thinking back on how detailed the story of this character was, that was essentially just a broken action figure, is so funny to me. And while I love all of the lore that I created while playing with a broken action figure, that toy will always remind me of the very rare time when I was visited by my abuela from Puerto Rico that Thanksgiving so many years ago. And with toys out of the way, it's time to transition into a very important part of Spider-Man history for me: video games. Now, many people celebrate the Spider-Man 2 video game based on the film of the same name. Rightfully so, it's a fantastic video game. However, my recollection of this fantastic game is considerably different than everyone else's. You see, since I didn't own a PlayStation 2, a GameCube, or an Xbox growing up, I wasn't able to play the same Spider-Man 2 that everyone else did. Instead, I played the Spider-Man 2 game on my Nintendo DS. Now, I've joked about the quality of this game on the channel before, but look, I genuinely love this game. You see, I have quite the affinity for 2D side-scrollers, and looking back on it, this was a really creative game that placed one of my favorite characters in a genre that I loved. But flashing back to when I first got the game, I was obsessed with it. I didn't complete a lot of games when I was a kid, but this was one of the games that I played regularly. I took it with me everywhere. I was determined to beat this game, and I eventually did. And it was so rewarding for me to actually get to see credits in a video game, something that I rarely got to see. And I played this game so much that I would delete save files and replay the game multiple times, which again was rare for me as well. And all around, I just have a lot of nostalgia for this game. I have some specific memories that are just framed with me playing Spider-Man 2 on the DS and then something else happening. Like, I remember the something else through the game almost. Like, I had one very specific day where I stayed home from school because I was sick, and I played this game the entire day. And on that day, I watched the very first episode of the Rachel Ray Show. I don't know if anybody remembers who that is or who that was, but for me, it was significant. So yeah, there's not a lot to say here. This is just an incredibly, prominent game for me growing up, and it kept Spider-Man in my life a little bit longer. Now, after all that, many years go by. The scale tips, and for a number of years, I'm more into anime and manga than I am into superheroes. My love for Spider-Man never dies, but I think of the character a little less than I used to. But at the end of high school, I see a solicitation for a Spider-Man game. This video game was a movie tie-in game for the original Mark Webb Amazing Spider-Man film. And who would have thought that such an odd release would have such an important impact on my life? Anyway, I saw the solicitation for the game, and I remembered back to how much I loved playing as Spider-Man in video games. In addition, how much I loved playing as Batman in that recent Arkham game. So I pre-ordered a copy of the Amazing Spider-Man game. The thing is, I pre-ordered it pretty early, and so I had to wait a little while to actually get it. So, at this point, I've rediscovered my love for Spider-Man, and I'm looking for another way to express my anticipation for the game. Then, it clicks. It's so obvious. There are hundreds of Spider-Man comics that I've never read, and during this time where I can't stop thinking about Spider-Man in anticipation for this game might be the best time to start. So I start doing some research on things that I remember from Spider-Man comics that I saw in the attic of my house. And the image that kept coming to my mind was the Spider-Man character who was wearing a hoodie, who of course we all know as the sensational Scarlet Spider. So I did some research on some wikis and caught up with what he was up to and how his story ended. I remember reading random Wikipedia articles about Spider-Man and then transitioning into the Clone Saga. I also remember I had worked at Midtown Comics at that time, and I used my paycheck to buy a 50 Years of Spider-Man encyclopedia. And I read it page to page, slowly educating myself on a lifetime of Spider-Man stories, eventually leading me to spending money on the real thing. And so, to feed my Spider-Man video game anticipation, I started reading Spider-Man back issues, until I eventually found my eye wandering to modern comics. Lucky for me, at the time, there was a new Scarlet Spider comic being published for the first time in years. So with that attachment to this character, it was easy access into the world of modern comics. After this deep dive into Spider-Man, I only wanted more and more of the character in the comics, and that eventually led me to wanting more of other specific Marvel characters like Daredevil or She-Hulk, and then eventually the entire Marvel universe. Since then, I've been an avid comic book reader, and I've always had a subscription to at least one ongoing comic. And it's all thanks to this movie game that not a lot of people remember fondly. Spider-Man was the match that lit my fire of passion for the world of comic books. Although my fire still needed some more wood, to make the fire larger, because you want to add wood to the fire to make it bigger. Also, you should try to avoid exposing your comic book collection to fire and smoke damage. You don't want to expose your comics to smoke or fire. What was I just talking about? And those are my early memories with Spider-Man, some of the most significant cliff notes of my history with the character. Now, of course, there are tons of other Spider-Man memories that I have that are really important to me. One memory that comes to mind is renting the original Sam Raimi Spider-Man film from Blockbuster and watching it at home with my mom. Watching that movie for the first time was such a huge moment of discovery, and I remember a lot of scenes from that movie through the lens of that first viewing. I really should return that copy. I'm pretty sure I still have it, and if Blockbuster hasn't come for me now, they're gonna come for me eventually. So I should find a way to return that. Anyway, another one of my favorite memories growing up was looking at Spider-Man 2 production photos in Disney Magazine. It was like a little tiny TV guide sized magazine that you'd pick up when you were done grocery shopping, and I would always flip through it when my family was, shopping for groceries. And I very distinctly remember seeing photos from Spider-Man 2 and just thinking to myself wow, this is gonna be awesome. I can't wait for this movie. So yeah, I have plenty of other memories when it comes to Spider-Man and growing up with the character. But I truly believe that the memories that I shared in this video are some of the most important parts of that character's history to me. I genuinely think that without that attic full of comics or those Spider-Man toys or the Amazing Spider-Man video game, that I wouldn't be who I am today. I've worked with collectibles and comics for a while now, and I wouldn't be at this point in my career without Spider-Man. I mean, I love Spider-Man, but it's just so interesting to me that I owe a lot of who I am to loving that character. And I just really appreciate those early memories that I had with Spider-Man for making me who I am. So this Valentine's Day, I'm happy I was able to share something that I love in the form of Spider-Man. I'm happy that I made a new friend in the form of Rudra, and I'm excited about the future of the character and myself, honestly. Anyway, that's gonna do it for this video. If for some reason you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a like and to subscribe to my channel for more. As regular viewers know, I make a variety of content on my channel, and I'm always gonna make the videos that I wanna make. But if you see something you enjoy, make sure to let me know, and I'll try to prioritize that kind of content in the future. If you wanna watch me play video games live, check me out on Twitch at twitch.tv/carrotscraps, and all my other social media, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram are at carrotscraps as well. So I wanna thank you again so much for watching, and I'll see you soon. I used to twist him all the time when I was a kid, like that, like all around. But I genuinely think twisting him so much after being like completely still for so many years might have just broken him. So good job, Carrot Boy. Now I'm saying it.